Ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, welcome back to SJMMA, and today we are going to be talking about weight classes. They're in MMA for a reason, but sometimes fighters do need to change them for whatever reason, so I've picked out 10 that I think should move up or down in weight. Let's go. And I'm going to start with one that I've been saying for a very, very long time. It's on your screen from the get-go, Mr. Paulo Costa. Now, I don't know what happened with Paulo. He had a fantastic rise up the UFC. The Romero fight was insane. Lost to Adesanya, and it's just gone tits up since. It's not just about losing. When you get up to the elite level, you become a lot more likely to lose, no matter how good you are. But it's just the activity and even the way that he fights seems to have changed drastically over the last 3 to 4 years. I've always thought he'd make a good light heavyweight. It was definitely after the Vettori fight and all the shenanigans with the weight on that fight week that made me think, yeah, he needs to do this. And he's not won a fight, apart from Luke Rockhold, since he beat Yoel Romero. That ain't good enough. Now, exactly why the downfall has happened, we don't know. Maybe it is the weight, maybe it's the Adesanya loss completely took the wind out of his sails. But I've given you a couple of decent light heavyweight fights that he could definitely have. Khalil Roundtree's in a weird spot. He did great against Alex, but his best win is still Anthony Smith. I think if he was to fight Paulo Costa, it's a big name, keeps him relevant, and if he smashes him, which he might well do, it will do wonders for getting him back towards that title. And Carlos Ulberg, I don't know, he's got a fight at the minute. But I just think if you watch Ulberg fight, he's a bit sleeker than Costa. I think he'd probably walk a Costa into a big shot. But at his best, he's a battering ram Costa. And he can walk through anybody. So I definitely think that could be one that you could make. But hey, I'm just a prick making YouTube videos. You guys may not agree. If you agree, let me know. If you don't, let me know. Let's move on. I don't think a lot of you beautiful people are going to agree with me on this. But I think Johnny Walker should go to heavyweight. Now, I know his chin's made of rice paper. But punch resistance is one of the main things that's impacted by a big weight cut. And he does cut a lot to make it down to 205 pounds. So, in theory, goes up to heavyweight, he should have a speed advantage. And he should be able to take shots. But the caveat is, he'll be taking bigger shots. So, it's kind of one of those. But I think he's not really got much of an opportunity to work back to a title shot at 205 pounds. If he goes in at heavyweight, he can take shots better. Who knows? And the fights I've given him are Rosenstrike or Tybura. Very, very different kinds of style matchups for him. If he goes in there with someone like Rosenstrike, it's basically a chin checker. If he can take Rosenstrike's power, there aren't that many in the division that hit harder than him. I can only think of about 3 or 4, really. And Tybura is more of a grappling test. If it was up to me, if I was Dana White, first of all, get a fucking hair transplant. Second of all, I'd give him Rosenstrike. Because the most talked about thing about Walker at heavyweight, if it happens, which I think it should, is can he take the punches? So I would do Walker Rosenstrike, but I don't mind Walker Tybura. Walker Tuivasa maybe, but if I was making this and he went up, I'd do Johnny Walker, Jairzinho Rosenstrike. Probably Apex main event. This next one is definitely something that I want to see before one or both of these ladies retire. Zhang Weili has proven once and for all that she is the best strawweight on the planet, and I've always thought her physicality would move up really well to flyweight. Make her against Valentina. Next or soon. Relatively soon, the next 12 months I would say. Both of these two have got contenders in their own weight classes who they need to beat before this can happen, I would say. For Zhang Weili, it's Tatiana Suarez. She's been inactive, very inactive, but she's the only one in that division that I look at and think that's going to make Zhang's legacy and resume in the division any better. And for Valentina, it's Manon Fiorot. If they can get those won, you make this happen. As much as Valentina used to fight a bantamweight, she would have a size advantage, I'll say that for free, we know that, but I don't know, I just think the way that Zhang Weili is built, if she allowed herself to move up 10 pounds, she could be a real battering ram, and it would be difficult for Valentina to deal with it. I'm not going to go into detail on actually thinking about the fight itself, but this is what I would do. Let Zhang beat Tatiana Suarez, then go up and fight Valentina. I think that's what you have to do. It would be a shame if she retired without testing herself at flyweight. That's what I'll say. Right, number 4 on the list, Israel Adesanya. So, my reasoning behind this is, what can he do at middleweight that's really going to impact his legacy? Because there's nothing he can do at his age that's going to make him anywhere near close to Anderson Silva, at least in my opinion. So, he's already tried light heavyweight once, but he didn't fully try. He kind of went up on a whim, quite short notice for a weight move. I believe the only thing left on the table for Adesanya that will actually enhance the legacy he's already built is a permanent move. Take the time, work your body up, see what you can do at 205. I'd give him Yuri Prochazka. The fight was kind of thrown around after he lost to Dricus. They're managed by the same people, so it shouldn't be that hard to make. It's a great fight. Yuri was saying he'd like to move down to middleweight to fight Izzy. If I'm Izzy, I'm going up to Yuri. Because if you beat Yuri at middleweight, that doesn't really do a lot. You beat him at 205, all of a sudden, an MMA trilogy with Alex Pereira could be on the table. So Adesanya up to 205. Right, people, so far they've been quite self-explanatory and straightforward, but I tried to get some outside the box ones to kind of close the video out, and Brian Ortega down to bantamweight, if you really think about it, makes an awful lot of sense. Dimensionally, in terms of height and reach, he's fine at featherweight, there's nothing particularly wrong with him, but just looking at the physique of the man, there's just so much more that he could cut, so much more work he could do aesthetically, which would improve him as a fighter as well, obviously. Now, he's not the only fighter in a weight class who looks really kind of not built and skinny for that division. I mean, Max Holloway, for an example, is not a particularly built featherweight. We've already spoke about Adesanya, very, very lean for 185. But with them, they're so long and they're so good at using their reach and they're such good strikers, it kind of works for them. Ortega's a grappler. He's got a great chin, and the problem with maybe going down his punch resistance might go down. That could happen, but I don't think he needs to worry about too many people's power at 135 outside of O'Malley, but I'm not going to give him O'Malley straight away, obviously, so I'm looking at Ortega, I'm thinking, you're not going to win the featherweight belt. If you really knuckle down, turn yourself into an elite bantamweight, why not? See what happens. Rob Font is the one that screams out to me straight away. Of course, he won very, very recently over the weekend at UFC Vegas 99, so Rob Font is very much middle of the road rankings. There's a certain level of fighter that he can beat and a certain level of fighter that beats him. If Ortega goes down to bantamweight and beats Rob Font, things get interesting. I've also suggested, as you can see, Mr. Jose Aldo. Now, Brian Ortega's not a superstar in MMA, but he's a big name. Relatively big name. If Jose Aldo wants to fight again, Brian Ortega at 135 sells. Not as much as a Dominic Cruz fight would sell, that's a legacy fight, but Ortega has enough name value to go up against Aldo. Maybe in Brazil, maybe in Vegas, wherever. I like it, but I would probably say Rob Font is the more realistic and kind of obvious pick. But Ortega versus Aldo would be tasty. So, bit of a left field one, I think, Ortega down to bantamweight, but I like it. I think it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Let me know what you think about that one down below. Next up, another man who I think should go down in weight, Marvin Vettori. Now, he has been a welterweight before. The main problem I have with Marvin at 185 is as much as he's got brilliant cardio and arguably the best chin in the UFC outside of Max Holloway, if you're going to win a fight, you can't just take shots and do nothing in return. The whole idea of having a good chin is you take shots and put a dent in your opponent. Vettori's not very good at putting dents in people. I also think dimensionally, he's okay at middleweight. He's not a particularly small middleweight, but I think he'd be a particularly big welterweight. And if he's going to try and be a front-forward grappler, having a size advantage on some of your opponents is going to help him massively. So I think you should go down to welterweight again. It's a similar kind of story as to Brian Ortega. You can stay in your current weight class and you can be used as a gatekeeper for the top 5 or 6. Or you change and try and run at a title in a different weight class. So move down to 170, fight Gilbert Burns or Joaquin Buckley for me. Probably lean towards the Buckley one because I think Burns, Vettori would just, I think, lay on him because he's so much bigger. But Vettori-Buckley is a great fight. I like it. Make it happen. Let's go. Next up, the Boston finisher, Calvin Kattar. Now, there are sometimes you can look at the physique of a UFC fighter and you think you could definitely put size on and still remain athletic and quick. You look at Calvin Kattar, you think he could be one of those guys, or at least I do, to be honest. I look at the rest of the featherweight division and I don't see many favourable matchups in the top sort of half dozen for Calvin Kattar. In fact, I don't think I see any. If he was to put some size on and go up to 155, he'd be the perfect return opponent for Rafael Fiziev, who of course has been injured for quite a while. Regardless of what weight class he's in, I do not think that Calvin Kattar is of championship pedigree, and I don't think it's particularly outlandish of me to say that. I think he's a brilliant fighter. I think he's got some of the crispest boxing in the entire organisation, but there are holes. And if you've got holes, you may as well move up a weight class, try and have a speed advantage, and see where that takes you. So, Calvin Kattar up to lightweight, for me. Now, I know that he's number 8 on the list, but he's actually the last one that I did. I'll be honest, I was kind of clutching at straws, so I had to get very outside the box. And I've gone with Corey Sandhagen. I know you're probably not sure why I did that. It's a bit of a weird one, but I will explain. I think Corey Sandhagen is one of the best fighters in the UFC. He's worked tremendously hard on his offensive grappling. We saw in the Umar fight that defensive grappling could still do with some work, but Umar's a very, very good grappler, so you can't really hold that against him. The problem he's got at bantamweight is he's now going to have to go back and fight somebody on the come-up. And there's Davison Figueiredo is sat there. And Mario Batista, who just did the job on Jose Aldo, are there. They're people who will look at the way that Umar beat Sandhagen and think, I could probably do that. And I think Sandhagen could definitely be a world champion, but if he's going to do it, it's probably going to be at featherweight. I mean, he's tall enough for it. He's so lean that, again, a bit like Calvin Kattar, if he put some size on, he'd still probably be as athletic as he already is. And I look at Max Holloway, I look at Volkanovski, I look at Yair Rodriguez, I look at Arnold Allen, who I've given him if he was to go up to featherweight. I think they're more winnable for him than the likes of Merab and Umar. Just spoke about a bantamweight moving up. Let's talk about one that should go down. Henry Cejudo. Now, when he came back to MMA, I was excited. I think a lot of us were. His retirement did seem like it wasn't going to last, and he's back. So far, it's been a disappointment. His plan, and he made it very clear in interviews, was to beat Aljamain Sterling, win the bantamweight title, then go and win the featherweight title from Volkanovski and become Quad C, whatever he called himself. Bit cringe, but whatever. As much as I'm not a huge fan of Cejudo, it would be a real shame if this kind of second part of his UFC career, the twilight part, if you will, was to end on such a bad note and kind of tarnish his legacy, which I think it may have done slightly, maybe, but not as much as some people make it out to be. So, if I was him, to kind of salvage something from here, move back down to flyweight. He definitely still can. He's not got any taller, for fuck's sake. So, yeah, move back down to flyweight. Now, is it absolutely guaranteed that if he goes back down to flyweight, he wins the title again? Of course not. There are some brilliant fighters at flyweight, but he's so much more likely at this stage, considering what's already happened over the last 18 months, so much more likely to become champion again at 25. Now, because he's Henry Cejudo and he does have that name value, I don't think there's too much of a problem with handing him an immediate flyweight title fight against the winner of Pantoja Asakura. I think it'll be Pantoja, that's why his name's here. On the flip side, if you wanted him to win a contenders matchup first, I've put Royval here simply because as much as he's done great stuff in 2024, it's been less than a year since his title fight loss against Pantoja. You don't have to give him Royval, you could give him the winner of maybe Moreno Albazi could work if you want him to beat somebody to earn the shot. If you don't, just throw him in. Does he beat Pantoja? Maybe. Potentially. Not too sure. If it's ever made, I'll do a breakdown because it's very bloody interesting. But yeah, if Cejudo's going to make any kind of use out of this last run of his MMA career, go back down to flyweight and try and win that title again. That's what I would do if I was him. And finally, Michael Chandler at 170 pounds. Now, there's a big caveat here. If he loses against Charles Oliveira, and if he does lose, he still wants to fight again. If those kind of fall into place, then his fight after Oliveira should be at welterweight for me. I mentioned this in Monday's video, the UFC 312 card builder. If you've not seen it, check it out. Michael Chandler lost so much of his career to the idea of fighting Conor McGregor that even though he is nearly 40, he hasn't fought for a long period of time, so he's probably relatively fresh. So the idea of him maybe losing to Oliveira, which he probably will, and then still wanting to fight again, is not completely out of the question despite his age, I think. Everything starts getting more difficult as you get older. Everything from touching your toes, wiping your arse, or pissing on your bed sheets every night. But in terms of an MMA way of looking at that, make him wait. I'm sure that's a nightmare if you're like 39 and you've been doing it for 25 years like he did in wrestling before MMA. So, yeah. He's a thick-set dude. He's not particularly tall, but if he was to go up to welterweight, I don't think he'd look particularly small. Short, yeah, but small, definitely not. So, if he does lose against Oliveira, again, it's still an if, we don't know yet, but I think he will. There are two names that I'd want to see him fight at welterweight. One is Wonderboy Thompson. Because Chandler's quite a big name, Wonderboy's quite a big name. Put that on pay-per-view. I'd watch it. Other people would watch it, lovely. The other one is Ian Gary. If he doesn't get Colby Covington, the prototype but kind of different version of Colby, who's a big name that people would think, okay, I'll watch that, is Michael Chandler. I think those two would not necessarily have a particularly vicious back and forth in a press conference setting, but it could build hype. I don't think Ian Gary deserves the Usmans, the Edwards, or the JDMs of the world when your best win is Michael Venom Page. Not sure about that, to be honest. So, yeah. Ian Gary against Michael Chandler, or Michael Chandler against Wonderboy Thompson if he goes up to welterweight after losing to Charles Oliveira. A lot of if, buts and maybes there, people, but hope you followed. Right then, that just about wraps up my video on 10 UFC fighters who should change weight class right now. If you agree with my takes, let me know. If you don't, you can call me a prick, that's fine, I'll call you on back. Anyway, with all that being said, take care and I'll see you very soon. Goodbye.